The room was so quiet that I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. The bright surgical lights hung above me like a final sunrise, and the clock on the wall ticked louder than it ever had before. In just a few seconds, I was going to give my kidney to my son. A choice made out of love, fear, and hope. A choice I had prepared my heart for. The doctors were ready, the nurses were in position, and my son was already being prepped in the next room. Everything was set. Then, out of nowhere, my grandson's small voice cut through the silence and stopped everything cold. I never imagined that the most important moment of my life would come down to a child holding a secret, or that the truth would wait until the very last second to reveal itself. My son has always been my pride. From the moment I held him as a baby, I promised myself I would protect him no matter what. Life wasn't always kind to him, but he grew into a strong, hard-working man and a devoted father. When we found out his kidneys were failing, it felt like the ground disappeared beneath my feet. The doctors spoke in careful tones, using words like chronic, urgent, and transplant list. All I heard was that my son's life was slipping away and time was not on our side. When I was tested and found to be a match, the decision didn't feel like a decision at all. I didn't think about my age, my fears, or the risks.
I only thought about him.
About seeing him laugh again, without pain in his eyes. About watching him grow old. About being there for my grandson's milestones, with his father healthy beside him. Donating my kidney felt like the one thing I could do to fix what was breaking our family apart. The weeks leading up to the surgery were heavy with emotion. We tried to act normal, but everything felt fragile, like one wrong word could shatter us. My son thanked me more times than I could count. Sometimes he cried when he thought I wasn't looking. Sometimes I cried too, alone at night, praying that everything would go right. Through it all, my grandson stayed close to me. He's a quiet boy, observant, always listening more than speaking. I noticed how often he stared at me, as if he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. The morning of the surgery arrived faster than I expected. The hospital smelled of disinfectant and quiet fear. My son squeezed my hand before they wheeled him away, and I told him the same thing I told him his whole life. Everything's going to be okay. I believed it. I had to believe it. This was the moment all our pain was leading up to. One operation, one sacrifice, and a new beginning. As I lay on the hospital bed, the medical team moved around me with calm precision. They explained the procedure one last time, asking if I had any questions. I shook my head. My mind was elsewhere. I thought about my late wife and how proud she would have been. I thought about birthdays, holidays, and ordinary days that suddenly felt precious. I thought about my grandson, waiting somewhere in the hospital with his mother, probably scared and confused. That's when I saw him. He stood near the doorway, too small for the oversized visitor badge hanging from his neck. His eyes were wide, his hands clenched into fists. He wasn't supposed to be there. Someone must have let him slip in for a quick goodbye. I smiled at him, trying to ease his fear, but he didn't smile back. Instead, he looked at me like he was carrying something heavy, something too big for a child his age. The anesthesiologist asked if we were ready to begin. The nurse reached for my arm, and then my grandson took a step forward. "Wait," he said. His voice trembled, but it was loud enough to stop the room. Everyone froze. The doctors looked confused. His mother rushed toward him, apologizing, trying to pull him back. But he shook his head, tears streaming down his face. He looked straight at me, not at his father, not at the doctors. At me. "I have to tell you something," he said. My heart skipped. In that moment, fear wrapped itself around my chest tighter than any medical strap. This wasn't a child acting out. This was something else. Something serious. Ask them to give him a moment. The room hesitated, caught between protocol and humanity. He swallowed hard and whispered words that made my blood run cold. What he revealed wasn't loud or dramatic. It wasn't shouted or screamed. It was soft, broken, and full of guilt. But every word landed like a hammer. It was a secret that had been sitting quietly in his small heart, growing heavier as the surgery date got closer. A secret no one else knew. A secret that could change everything. The doctors exchanged uneasy glances. My son, unaware in the next room, was just minutes away from surgery. My mind raced, trying to understand what my grandson was saying and what it meant for all of us. Questions exploded in my head. Was this true? How could this have been missed? Why now? Why at the very last second? The clock on the wall kept ticking. I felt torn between two unbearable possibilities. If I went through with the donation, could it put my son at risk? If I stopped the surgery, could it cost him his life? The weight of that choice pressed down on me harder than anything I had ever known. As the medical team stepped aside to discuss what had just been revealed, I locked eyes with my grandson. He looked relieved and terrified all at once, like someone who finally told the truth but didn't know what would happen next. I reached out my hand, needing him to know he did the right thing, even though I didn't yet understand the full cost. The room was no longer quiet. It was filled with whispers, urgent voices, and the sound of a plan unraveling. Somewhere down the hall, my son waited, trusting that everything was under control. And there I was, seconds away from changing my son's life forever, now forced to question whether love alone was enough to move forward. As the doctors turned back toward me with serious expressions on their faces, I realized that this surgery might not happen at all. Or if it did, nothing would ever be the same again. What my grandson revealed in that moment would test our family, challenge everything we believed, and lead us down a path none of us saw coming. And that's where the real story begins. The doctors didn't say much at first. They stepped just outside the room, speaking in low voices that still felt too loud in my ears. I could tell something serious was happening, something that couldn't be brushed aside as a child's imagination. My grandson was taken gently by a nurse and his mother, but before he left, he looked back at me one last time. That look stayed with me. It wasn't fear anymore. It was worry, like he knew the truth had power, and once spoken, it couldn't be taken back. As I lay there waiting, my mind drifted backward, trying to understand how we got to this point. How something so important could be hidden for so long. My family has never been good at secrets. We wear our feelings openly. Or, at least I thought we did. But illness changes people. Fear changes people. And sometimes, children see things adults are too distracted or scared to notice. My son's kidney disease didn't come out of nowhere. There were years of warning signs. Fatigue, hospital visits, tests that never quite gave clear answers. Each time, we hoped for the best. Doctors tried medications, diet changes, monitoring. We told ourselves it was manageable. But deep down, we all knew the day might come when hope would need more than medicine. When his condition worsened, the pressure on the whole family grew. His wife tried to stay strong, but I could see how tired she was. She carried worry in her eyes every day. My grandson sensed it too. Kids always do. They pick up on whispered conversations, sudden silences, and late-night phone calls. They may not understand the words, but they understand the weight. I remembered moments that now felt different. Times when my grandson asked questions that seemed strange at the time. Why does Daddy go to the hospital so much? What happens if the medicine stops working? Once he asked me quietly if people could live with just one kidney. I laughed it off then, saying yes, people do it all the time. I didn't think twice about it. Now, that memory made my stomach tighten. In the weeks before the surgery, there had been tests. So many tests. Blood work, scans, paperwork. Everything was rushed but thorough, or so we believed. The transplant team reassured us again and again. They said we were a good match. That timing was critical. That waiting could be dangerous. Those words pushed us forward, leaving little room for doubt or second thoughts. But children live in the spaces adults ignore. While the doctors debated outside, a nurse stayed with me, trying to keep things calm. She asked if I was comfortable, if I needed anything. I nodded, but my body felt numb. My thoughts kept circling around one question. What exactly did my grandson know? And how did he know it? I wondered if he overheard something. A conversation between doctors. A phone call someone thought was private. Or maybe he saw a document, a test result, something left on a table. Hospitals are full of information, and sometimes it slips through cracks meant to protect us. The idea that a child might have discovered something life-changing before we did was unsettling and painful. Time felt stretched and distorted. Every minute that passed was another minute my son waited in the next room, unaware that everything was on hold. I imagined him lying there, trusting the process, trusting me. That trust weighed heavily on my chest. I had promised him I'd be there. I had promised him this would work. Eventually, the doctors came back in. Their faces were serious, but controlled. They explained that what my grandson shared raised concerns that needed to be reviewed immediately. They couldn't ignore it. Patient safety came first. Those words echoed in my mind. Safety, risk, uncertainty. They didn't explain everything, and maybe they couldn't yet. They said more tests might be needed, that there were questions about compatibility that weren't as simple as we thought. They assured me they were doing everything possible, but their careful language told me this was bigger than a simple delay. I asked about my son. Could they at least tell him what was happening? They exchanged looks again and said they would speak with him soon, once they had more clarity. That answer didn't comfort me. It made the gap between us feel wider than ever. After they left, I closed my eyes and tried to steady my breathing. I thought about the day my grandson was born. How small he was, how he wrapped his fingers around mine, how I promised, in my own way, to protect him too. Now he had done something brave, something that might save or change lives. But bravery doesn't make choices easier. It only makes them heavier. When they allowed my grandson back into the room briefly, he climbed onto a chair beside me. No one told him to speak, but he did anyway. He talked about things he noticed, about questions he asked that never got answers, about how something didn't feel right to him. He didn't use big words.
He didn't need to.
His honesty cut through everything. I listened without interrupting, even when my heart ached. I didn't tell him he might be wrong. I didn't tell him he caused trouble. I just held his hand and thanked him for telling the truth. Whatever happened next, I knew one thing for sure. This moment would stay with him forever. Outside the room, the hospital continued its routine. Stretchers rolled by. Announcements echoed softly through the halls. Life went on, unaware that our families stood at a crossroads. That contrast felt cruel. How could the world keep moving when ours was paused in uncertainty? I wondered how many other families sat in rooms like this, waiting on decisions made in hushed voices. How many carried secrets they didn't even know existed. Illness has a way of exposing cracks, not just in the body, but in the systems and relationships we rely on. As hours passed, fatigue set in, physical and emotional. I felt older than I ever had. Not because of pain, but because of responsibility. Loving someone sometimes means facing impossible choices, and there is no guidebook for moments like this. Still, the biggest question remained unanswered. Was my grandson's secret something that could stop the transplant altogether? Or was it something that would change how it was done?
No one could tell me yet.
And that not knowing was the hardest part. Somewhere down the hall, my son waited. Somewhere nearby, my grandson sat with his mother, probably replaying everything he said, wondering if he did the right thing. And here I was, caught between them, holding a decision that hadn't fully formed yet. The doctors promised updates soon. They said they needed time. Time felt like a luxury we didn't have. As the lights above me dimmed slightly and the room grew quiet again, I stared at the ceiling and realized that this story was no longer just about a kidney donation. It was about trust, truth, and the unexpected voices that change our lives. And the secret my grandson revealed was only beginning to show its weight. The waiting became its own kind of torture. Every sound in the hallway made my heart jump, thinking it might be news about the surgery, about my son, about whether this kidney donation would even happen. Nurses came and went, offering water, adjusting monitors, speaking softly like they were afraid to break something fragile. And maybe they were, because at that point, everything felt fragile. One wrong word, one wrong decision, and our family could crack in ways that might never fully heal. I kept thinking about my son in the other room. I imagined his thoughts racing the same way mine were. He had always hated waiting, even as a child. He needed answers, needed to understand what was happening. The idea that he might feel confused or betrayed hurt me deeply. I wondered if he would think I was backing out, that fear had gotten the better of me at the last second. That wasn't true, but fear has a way of twisting perception, especially when silence fills the gaps. Eventually, a doctor came to speak with me again, this time alone. He explained that they were reviewing older medical records, looking for details that might have been overlooked years ago. He spoke carefully, choosing his words with precision. He didn't confirm or deny what my grandson had revealed, only that it raised concerns worth investigating. That uncertainty hung heavy in the air. I wanted clarity. I wanted certainty. Instead, I got careful pauses and guarded explanations. While he spoke, I thought about the past in a new light. My son's early adulthood, when he had a few unexplained health scares that were brushed off as stress or exhaustion. A hospitalization years ago that ended without clear answers. At the time, we were just relieved it wasn't something worse. Now, I wondered if those moments were pieces of a puzzle we never finished putting together. The doctor asked if I remembered any family medical history that might be relevant. I shook my head slowly. Or at least I thought I knew everything. But families are full of stories half told and truths softened over time. My parents' generation didn't talk much about illness. Things were hidden, minimized, or simply accepted as fate. I suddenly questioned how much I truly knew about our family's health history. Across the hall, my daughter-in-law sat with my grandson. Later, she told me he hadn't stopped apologizing. He was afraid he had ruined everything. Afraid his father would be angry. Afraid he had caused more pain instead of helping. Hearing that broke my heart. He was just a child, carrying guilt no child should have to bear. She tried to reassure him, but uncertainty makes comfort difficult. She, too, was struggling. Part of her wanted to trust the doctors completely, to believe the system would catch any problems. Another part of her wondered how something so important could come down to a child speaking up. She questioned whether signs were missed, whether questions went unasked because we were all desperate for a solution. That desperation can make people overlook things they shouldn't. As hours turned into more hours, tension began to show in subtle ways. Nurses whispered more urgently. Phones rang more often. A transplant coordinator stopped by, her face tight with concern, though she tried to stay professional. I could tell this wasn't a routine delay. Something complicated was unfolding behind the scenes. I asked again about my son. This time, they allowed me to speak to him briefly through a video call. Seeing his face was harder than I expected. He looked tired but hopeful, unaware of the full weight of what was happening. I told him there was a delay, that doctors needed to double-check something to be safe. I tried to sound calm. I didn't mention my grandson.
Not yet.
His eyes searched my face, like he knew there was more I wasn't saying. Is everything okay? He asked. I hesitated, just a second too long. They're being careful, I said. That's all. He nodded, but I could tell he wasn't fully convinced. When the call ended, I sat there staring at the blank screen, feeling like I had just crossed into dangerous territory. Keeping the truth from him felt wrong, but telling him too soon could cause panic or despair. Every choice felt like the wrong one. Meanwhile, my grandson remained unusually quiet. He stopped asking questions and started watching instead. Watching adults whisper. Watching expressions change. Watching time stretch. Children notice more than we think, especially when something feels off. I worried about what this moment would do to him long term. Would he always remember being the one who stopped the surgery? Would he blame himself if things went wrong? Another layer of tension settled in when discussions turned to alternative options. Other donors. Waiting lists. Time frames. None of them were comforting. Each option came with risks, delays, and uncertainty. My son's condition wasn't something that could wait forever. Every day mattered. Every decision carried weight. I also had to face my own fears more honestly. I had been so focused on saving my son that I barely allowed myself to think about my own safety. Now, With questions raised about compatibility and hidden risks, fear crept in. Not fear of pain, but fear of unintended consequences. Fear that love alone might not be enough to protect either of us. The hospital room felt smaller as the day went on. The walls seemed to close in with every unanswered question. I replayed my grandson's words again and again, analyzing every detail, searching for clues. Children don't invent complex medical concerns out of nowhere. There was a reason he spoke up. That truth anchored me, even as everything else felt uncertain. Late in the evening, another specialist joined the discussion. More tests were mentioned. Genetic factors, rare conditions, long-term outcomes. The language grew more technical, harder to follow, but the seriousness was clear. Whatever the secret was, it touched deeper layers than we initially understood. Still, no final decisions were made. As night fell outside the hospital windows, exhaustion settled over everyone. But sleep was impossible. Too much was at stake. I lay there listening to the steady beep of machines, thinking about how close we came to crossing a point of no return without knowing everything we should have known. This wasn't just about a kidney transplant anymore. It was about trust in medicine, trust within a family, and the unexpected ways truth can surface when we least expect it. And as the doctors prepared for another long round of evaluations, one question echoed louder than all the rest. When the full truth finally comes out, will it save my son's life or change it forever? Night settled over the hospital, but inside our corner of it, time refused to move. The lights outside the window dimmed, the hallway traffic slowed, and still we waited. Every update felt just out of reach, like answers were circling us, but never landing. The transplant that was supposed to happen hours ago now felt like a fragile idea instead of a plan. I could feel the tension spreading through the family, even though we weren't all in the same room. My daughter-in-law sat rigid in a chair down the hall, her phone untouched in her lap. My grandson leaned against her side, eyes half closed but alert, as if he was afraid that if he slept, something important would happen without him. And my son remained in his room, separated from us by walls and silence, trusting that the people he loved were doing everything they could. Doctors came in waves. One would ask a question, another would review a chart, another would quietly step out with a phone pressed to their ear. I caught fragments of conversations that raised more questions than they answered. Words like timeline, risk assessment, and protocol floated through the air. Each word added weight to the moment, reminding me that this decision could not be undone once made. At one point, a nurse asked me how I was feeling, not physically, but emotionally. The question caught me off guard. I didn't know how to answer it honestly without breaking down. I told her I was holding on. That was the truth. Holding on to hope. Holding on to patience. Holding on to the belief that stopping, even this late, might be the right thing. I thought again about my grandson. How brave he was to speak up. How much pressure he must have felt, standing in a room full of adults and professionals, stopping something everyone believed was necessary. I wondered what made him finally say something at that exact moment. Fear? Guilt? Or a quiet certainty that he couldn't ignore anymore? Whatever it was, it changed everything. The doctors eventually asked to speak with me and my daughter-in-law together. That alone made my heart race. When professionals ask for family meetings late at night, it's rarely good news. We sat across from them, hands folded, trying to read their faces. They explained that new information had emerged, information that required careful interpretation. They were waiting on final confirmations before making any recommendations. Still no clear answer. Still no decision. My daughter-in-law asked the question I was too afraid to voice. If we hadn't stopped today, what could have happened? The room went quiet. The doctor didn't answer right away. That pause told us everything. When he finally spoke, his words were measured, cautious, and heavy. He didn't describe outcomes, but he made it clear that proceeding without addressing these concerns could have carried serious consequences. That thought sent a chill through me. We were seconds away from making a choice we couldn't take back. At the same time, delaying came with its own risks. My son's health wasn't stable. His condition didn't pause just because we needed answers. Every delay mattered. Every day carried uncertainty. We were trapped between two dangers, trying to choose the lesser one without a full map. When they left us alone again, my daughter-in-law broke down. Quietly, so our son wouldn't hear. She asked me if I regretted offering to donate. The question stunned me. I shook my head immediately.
I didn't regret the choice.
I regretted how little we truly understood before getting this far. Love made the decision easy. Reality made it complicated. I asked if she thought my son would understand when he finally learned the truth. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked down the hallway toward his room. "He'll understand," she said finally. "But it might still hurt." That hurt weighed on me. I had always tried to shield my son from pain, even when he was grown. Now I couldn't. No matter what happened next, pain was already part of the story. Later, I was allowed another brief update call with my son. This time, he could tell something was wrong. He asked directly if there was a problem with the transplant. I told him there were questions the doctors needed to clear up first. Again, I avoided the full truth. Again, I hated myself a little for it. But the fear of overwhelming him before we had answers kept me quiet. After the call ended, I stared at my reflection in the darkened screen. I looked tired, older, like the weight of generations pressed down on my shoulders. I realized that this moment wasn't just testing medicine or timing. It was testing trust. Trust between parent and child. Trust between family and doctors. Trust in a system we had handed our lives over to. The hospital grew quieter as the night stretched on, but inside my head, the noise only grew louder. What if the secret pointed to something genetic? Something that affected my son more deeply than anyone realized? What if donating my kidney wouldn't help the way we hoped? Or worse, what if it made things harder for him down the road? At the same time, I couldn't shake the fear that delaying too long could push him past a point of recovery. That fear clawed at me. It whispered that time was running out, that every minute spent waiting could cost us everything. My grandson finally fell asleep in his mother's arms, exhaustion winning over fear. Watching him breathe steadily brought a strange mix of comfort and dread. He had spoken his truth. Now the adults had to decide what to do with it. As the first hint of morning light crept into the hallway, a doctor approached me again. His expression was serious, more focused than before. He said they were close to making a determination. Very close. They needed one last confirmation. One last discussion. My heart pounded as he spoke. This was it. The moment everything had been building toward. I felt the air shift, like the calm before a storm. Somewhere nearby, my son waited for news that could change his life. Somewhere deep inside me, hope and fear collided, neither willing to back down. And as the doctor turned to walk away, leaving me alone with my thoughts once more, I knew the next decision would push us to the edge of everything we thought we understood. The doctor didn't leave the hallway right away. Instead, he paused, turned back, and said something that made my breath catch. There was another issue they needed to discuss. Something separate from what my grandson had revealed, but connected in a way no one expected. That single sentence shifted the air around us. It told me we weren't just dealing with one hidden truth anymore. We were standing on the edge of something even bigger. He explained that while reviewing updated records, they noticed an inconsistency in the transplant timeline. A recent test result from my son hadn't matched earlier patterns. At first, it looked like a routine fluctuation. Now, combined with everything else, it raised a red flag. They weren't sure what it meant yet, but it could affect how urgent the transplant truly was, or whether it could safely happen at all in this way. I felt like the ground beneath me tilted. All this time, we believed there was only one path forward.
Donate the kidney.
Save my son's life. But now that path was splitting into unknown directions, each one darker and more uncertain than the last. As the doctor spoke, my mind raced ahead. If my son's condition wasn't what we thought, then every choice we made was based on incomplete information. That realization hurt almost as much as the fear itself. It wasn't just about timing anymore. It was about whether we truly understood what we were fighting. Not long after, another specialist joined us. This one spoke about long-term outcomes and potential complications in careful, neutral tones. He mentioned how stress, hidden conditions, and genetic factors can sometimes mask the true nature of an illness. I couldn't help but think about my grandson again, about how he noticed something felt wrong long before any of us did. It made me wonder how many warning signs we had all missed. When my daughter-in-law was brought into the conversation again, she looked overwhelmed but focused. She asked questions none of us had asked before. What if my son didn't need a transplant right now? What if the urgency was based on outdated assumptions? And if that was true, what did that mean for the risk I was about to take? The doctors didn't have clear answers yet. They said they were waiting on lab confirmations and expert opinions. That waiting became heavier than ever. We weren't just paused anymore. We were suspended, caught between possibilities that could change everything. Word eventually reached my son that something more serious was unfolding. This time, he insisted on speaking to all of us together. When his face appeared on the screen again, I could see the tension written all over him. He wasn't angry. He wasn't scared. He was confused, and that somehow hurt the most. He asked if this delay meant he was worse than they thought, or better, or if something had gone wrong with me as a donor. Hearing those questions broke something inside me. I wanted to tell him everything. I wanted to explain about my grandson, about the records, about the doubts. But the doctors advised caution. Too much information without clarity could do more harm than good. So again, we walked that painful line between honesty and protection. Meanwhile, my grandson woke up and noticed the shift immediately. Children feel changes like animals sense storms. He clung to his mother and asked if his dad was okay. She told him yes, but her voice wavered. He looked at me then, searching my face for reassurance. I nodded, but inside, fear pulsed steadily. Then came the moment that truly raised the stakes. A nurse arrived with a sealed envelope and asked to speak with the doctors privately. The room went silent as they read its contents. I watched their expressions change, subtle but unmistakable. Whatever was in that envelope wasn't minor. It added another layer to an already impossible situation. When they finally spoke, they said the new information could affect not just the transplant, but future treatment decisions for my son. They needed to consult additional experts before proceeding with anything. This wasn't just a delay anymore. This was a potential shift in the entire course of his medical journey. I felt torn apart by competing fears. Fear that moving forward could be dangerous. Fear that stopping could cost us precious time. Fear that the truth, once fully revealed, would change how my son saw all of us. And fear that my grandson, so young and innocent, had been placed at the center of a storm no child should have to face. The hospital began to wake up around us. Morning staff arrived. Shift changes happened. But for us, the night never really ended. The tension carried over, thick and unrelenting. I sat quietly, replaying every decision that led us here. Every conversation, every assumption. I realized how fragile certainty really is. How quickly it can unravel when one voice, one detail, one test result challenges everything you believe. As the doctors prepared for another round of discussions, one thing became painfully clear. The secret my grandson revealed was only the first crack in the surface. Beneath it lay deeper questions, deeper risks, and choices that would demand more than courage. They would demand truth, even if that truth changed everything. And as I waited for the next update, heart pounding and hands trembling, I knew we were closer than ever to the moment that would decide not just the fate of a kidney transplant, but the future of our family. The doctor finally returned, and this time he didn't hesitate at the doorway. He came straight in, closed the door behind him, and sat down. That alone told me the waiting was over. My heart pounded so hard I thought everyone in the room could hear it. My daughter-in-law reached for my hand, and for the first time since this ordeal began, the doctor spoke without careful pauses. They had the results. What my grandson revealed turned out to be real. Not imagined, not misunderstood. A detail buried in old records and recent tests confirmed it. There was a rare compatibility issue that had been overlooked because, on paper, everything else looked perfect. If we had gone ahead with the kidney donation as planned, My son's body could have rejected the organ in a way that might have caused serious complications. Not immediately, not dramatically, but quietly, dangerously over time. The kind of risk that doesn't show itself until it's too late. The room felt like it tilted again, but this time toward clarity. The doctor said the words I didn't know I was holding my breath for. Stopping the surgery likely saved my son from a much worse outcome. My grandson's timing, as painful and chaotic as it was, may have prevented years of suffering, or worse. I closed my eyes, overwhelmed by relief and grief at the same time. Relief that we stopped. Grief that we ever came so close without knowing the truth. Love had pushed us forward blindly, and a child's honesty pulled us back just in time. Then came the next part. The second issue they found meant that my son's condition, while serious, wasn't progressing as rapidly as originally believed. A new treatment plan was possible. Not easy, not guaranteed, but real. There were options that didn't involve immediate surgery, options that could stabilize him while the medical team explored safer transplant paths in the future. When we told my son everything about the secret, the risk, the decision to stop, he was silent for a long time. I feared anger. I feared heartbreak. Instead, when he finally spoke, his voice cracked with emotion. He thanked his son. Hearing that broke me. My grandson, sitting beside him later, didn't fully understand the medical details, but he understood one thing clearly. He helped his dad. The weight he had been carrying lifted in that moment, replaced by tears of relief. That image will stay with me forever. We thought that was the end of it. The resolution. The moment where everything finally made sense. But life had one more turn waiting. Before discharge, another doctor requested a private conversation with me.
Just me.
His tone was calm, but serious. He explained that while reviewing donor screenings, they discovered something unexpected in my own results. Something unrelated to the transplant, something that hadn't caused symptoms yet. If we hadn't gone through this process, it might have gone unnoticed for years. It wasn't urgent. It wasn't life-threatening, but it needed attention. I sat there quietly, absorbing the irony. I went into the hospital believing I was there to save my son's life. Instead, the chain of events, my grandson's secret, the halted surgery, the deeper testing, may have saved mine too. When I walked back to my family, I didn't tell them right away. I looked at my son, alive, smiling weakly but genuinely. I looked at my grandson, calmer than I had seen him in days. I realized that sometimes the biggest miracles don't come from plans going right, but from them falling apart at the last second. We didn't get the ending we expected.
There was no surgery that day.
No dramatic recovery montage. But we got something far more powerful. We got truth. We got time. And we got a reminder that even the smallest voice can change the course of everything. And as we walked out of that hospital together, I knew one thing for sure. This story wasn't just about a kidney donation that almost happened. It was about listening, even when the truth comes from the most unexpected place. The days after we left the hospital felt strangely quiet. Not peaceful exactly, but lighter, like a storm had passed and left everything damp and fragile. We were exhausted, emotionally and physically, but there was also relief woven into every breath. My son was home, resting, adjusting to a new treatment plan that gave us something we hadn't had in a long time. No surgery date hanging over our heads. No ticking clock shouting urgency. Just careful steps forward. The doctors stayed involved, checking on him closely, adjusting medications, explaining things in clearer terms now that the rush had slowed. We asked more questions than ever before. Questions we should have asked earlier, maybe, but didn't know how to. This time, we didn't rush the answers. We listened. We learned. We accepted that medicine isn't always a straight line, and neither is love. My son changed after that experience. Not in a sad way, but in a reflective one. He talked more openly about fear, about how helpless he felt waiting for a transplant that might not have been right for him. He admitted that part of him was terrified of waking up one day and realizing he survived the surgery but lost something else in the process: his energy, his independence, his sense of self. Saying those things out loud seemed to ease a burden he didn't know he was carrying. My daughter-in-law found her voice too. She became more involved in every appointment, every discussion. She no longer nodded politely at medical explanations.
She questioned them, clarified them,
Advocated fiercely. Watching her step into that role reminded me how crises can reveal strength we didn't know we had. And my grandson, he changed in ways that mattered most. At first, he was quieter than usual, like he was still waiting for the other shoe to drop. But as days passed and his father stayed stable, something softened in him. He smiled more, laughed more. The guilt he carried slowly loosened its grip. One night, while we were sitting together watching television, he leaned against me and said, "I was really scared, but I'm glad I said something." I told him the truth. That being scared doesn't mean you're wrong. Sometimes it means you care enough to speak up. He nodded, as if locking that lesson away for later in life. As for me, I followed up on my own health quietly. Tests, appointments, conversations I hadn't expected to have at this stage of my life. Nothing dramatic, but important. Preventive. A reminder that taking care of others shouldn't mean ignoring yourself. That lesson came late, but I welcomed it. Looking back, I think about how close we came to a very different ending. How a few seconds, a few words, could have changed everything. It's unsettling, but also grounding. It taught us humility. No matter how much we plan, no matter how strong our intentions, life has a way of demanding our attention when we least expect it. The kidney donation that almost happened became a turning point instead of a procedure. A moment that forced us to slow down, to listen more carefully, not just to doctors, but to each other. To notice the quiet voices. To respect instincts, even when they come from unexpected places. We still talk about the future. A transplant may still be part of my son's journey one day. That reality hasn't disappeared. But now it's approached with patience, caution, and deeper understanding. We know there are options. We know there is time to choose wisely. Sometimes people ask me if I feel disappointed that I didn't get to donate my kidney. I always shake my head. The goal was never the surgery. The goal was my son's life, his health, his future. If love meant stepping back instead of stepping forward, then that's exactly what love demanded. This experience also changed how I see family. I used to think protection meant making decisions for others, carrying burdens so they didn't have to. Now I understand that protection can also mean making space for truth, even when it's uncomfortable. Especially when it's uncomfortable. The story spread quietly among friends and relatives. Some were shocked that a child played such a pivotal role. Others said it made perfect sense. Children see clearly because they haven't learned how to ignore their instincts yet. They haven't been taught to stay silent for the sake of convenience. That thought stays with me. In a world full of noise, protocols, and rushed decisions, sometimes the most important moment comes when everything stops. When someone says, "Wait." When we choose to listen instead of push forward. If there's one takeaway from our journey, it's this. Don't underestimate the power of honesty, no matter where it comes from. Don't rush past doubts just because the path ahead seems clear. And don't assume that love always looks like sacrifice. Sometimes love looks like pause. Today, when I watch my son sit at the dinner table, laughing with his child, I feel gratitude more than anything else. Gratitude for second chances. For delays that protected instead of harmed. For a grandson brave enough to speak when it mattered most. Our story didn't end the way we expected, but it ended the way it needed to. And that, to me, is what makes it unforgettable.